Hey, this is Ben Vaughn with Brewster Consulting Group, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into SOPs. So SOPs stand for Standard Operating Procedures, and what these are is essentially a way for you to document exactly what goes on during a process, the individual steps that are taken to be able to get that result that you're looking for. And what SOPs are used for is typically in one of two ways. So one way is when you're at the beginning of a process improvement project, or really just if you're looking to better standardize and understand your operations. But at that point, you're going to be looking to understand what's going on. So typically this is going to be used in conjunction with something like a process map, where you can look at an individual part of that process and say, okay, what specific steps are taken to get the output that you're desired. And then from that, you'll be able to look at those and say, okay, where can we make improvements? What would lead to a better result or outcome for this process? The second place where you could use SOPs is at the end of a process improvement project. So here, what you're really going to be doing is, after you've already made your changes, you've implemented them, and everything is great. What you're looking to do is keep that consistent, keep those changes actually having the intended impact. So at this point, you're going to document what the new process is and really put that into play so that anybody can pick this up and say, okay, here's what I need to do, here's what needs to happen to produce the outcome that we're looking for. So it's really a great tool in being able to keep that consistency and measure those results going forward. It's also going to be great if you do another process improvement project down the line, because you're also going to be able to come back and just say, okay, here's what our current process is, here's where we could maybe improve it, here's what's going on. So those are some great uses of SOPs. So now let's take a little bit of a deeper dive and go into an individual SOP that I created, just something made up, and to see what the parts of the SOP are and what parts they play in terms of adding that value to your business. All right, so this is a sample SOP that we made up, and I'm going to preface this by saying what we were looking to do as part of this improvement project was to improve the speed that a patient goes through the emergency department. This is completely made up. I'm not a medical professional, so these are not real steps that may go on during a medical CT scan, but just to give you a sense of the kind of improvement items that can be represented on an SOP and the value of having it going forward. All right, so let's take a look. So obviously we have a title here. So what we're going to be talking about is the actual process of strapping a patient into a CT scanner. An effective date, so this is important to be able to say, okay, this is when we said this is what this process is starting. So that's really key, and to be able to say a timeline of this process if you've made changes over time. The line of business where this is primarily going to take effect. And then the scope. So the scope is really going into what's the purpose of this process, why is it important, why is it key to this entire process and getting the desired outcome. And then a key part here is stakeholders. So stakeholders are going to be everyone that's involved with the process. So in this instance, the CT technician, the CT nurse, the patients, of course, are a stakeholder because they're the ones being, taken care of. The ED staff and the patient travel staff are going to be people not directly involved, but people who will maybe be part of this process before and after, and who could be affected by the events that go on during this process. So that's really important to document as well, so you can understand people that might be important to have at the table when you're talking about improving these processes. And then as we come down here, we get into the actual procedure part, the fun part. So what we're looking at here on the left-hand column is the responsible parties, just to document who's doing what, and then the action steps. So actually in this, to highlight what we were trying to do in part of this was kind of a fake case study. What we did is we actually added a little bit more information than what you typically see on a SOP. So if you see the brackets, anything in the brackets is stuff that you normally wouldn't include in an SOP, because it's basically telling you what we did during the process improvement project. But usually you would just be documenting what steps go on at the current state. For example, the CT technician, the first step that when the patient comes in is begin to synthesize the sensor adhesive. Again, I'm not sure if that's actually a step that goes on, but this is a step that we had created to be an improvement. So typically, before the process improvement project, the CT technician would actually wait until the nurse was completed with their tasks to actually do the sensor adhesive to begin that process. And in this fictionalized environment, it takes a significant amount of time for that sensor adhesive to be ready to be applied to the patient and the sensors. So by starting that process earlier, you've now freed up time and reduced waste of just waiting around for that adhesive to be ready. So that's why we've documented that it's moved earlier in the process. And then we've got the process that the CT nurse takes. Again, we've had a adjustment here that we've noted that we've changed our guidelines that we actually speak to the patient about. It used to be the hospital's CT patient list. Now we go through the regulatory CT patient guidelines. And if the name isn't enough indication, what the purpose of that is basically saying we streamlined it. So instead of just going through a generic list that we need, what we've done is kind of broken it down to its bare bones and said, let's just look at the regulatory requirements for those patients. And then maybe if we need to add a couple of things to that, we can, but reducing the time that we're just doing things that we don't necessarily have to do to be able to reduce that throughput time. And then we go through, we separated the process into two parts, preparation and then the actual strapping in. And you can see that there's a little adjustment here. This actually wasn't a process improvement in terms of throughput. It was a process improvement in terms of patient safety. So process improvement doesn't necessarily mean just throughput time or efficiency. It can also mean patient safety. It can mean a whole lot of other things. So this is in particular putting the lead covering up higher in the patient's body so that they're not exposed to radiation at a greater percentage of their body. And it goes through that remaining parts of the strapping in process. And so that's the entirety of the actual procedure. But what's really important down here at the bottom is the version history. So the version history is, again, kind of going back to the effective date. Where did we make changes? Where was that impact made, or hopefully will be felt? So the initial draft was the effective date on 1/1, but you can see on 2/1 here we made these three changes. Typically, you wouldn't show this much information. You just say, hey, change this, change this, change this. But we go into a little bit more depth because this is a case study. We changed the guidelines to that for this purpose. Usually we wouldn't say what the purpose is. And then we added the requirement for CT technician to also cover the abdomen for additional patient safety. And then we moved the timing of the synthesization that we talked about to earlier in the process so that synthesization is not slowing down the process of actually getting the patient strapped in. So this is a little bit of a deep dive into an SOP. Hopefully you get a little understanding of what the value of them are and what they can be done, or how they can be used, to be able to really document that process, understand what's going on, and then be able to say, okay, this is how we're doing it. This is actually going to have an improvement, and that's going to be able to help drive your organization to see consistent results and consistent products from your key processes. So if this was helpful, please leave a comment below, and but otherwise we'll look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Thanks.